This is part one of a two-part YouTube presentation on the foundations and principles of human development, designed to be a concise summary. There's also a second presentation comparing Piaget and Vygotsky. I'll be using Watson's Theories of Human Development, available on Audible, for much of the content used in my independent study. His 24 lectures were educational and provided a perfect framework for this independent study. The Theories of Human Development are 24 parts over 12 hours that cover the theories and applications of developmental psychology theories from Freud to Vygotsky. He also provided a lot of personal stories and anecdotes, as well as an interesting history of the theories, as well as the theorists themselves. Before reviewing a quick prehistory of developmental psychology's origins, it's important to note the context of all theories. Watson does a great job of this by explaining that developmental theories reflect their environment, the environment in which they were created. He also points out that developmental psychology isn't of interest in a society unless it has children that are highly valued. The children aren't necessary for survival of the families, that many members of the society overall see the importance of supporting children, and that there is some kind of structure or time built in where children can transition from infant to adult. The first published advice on raising children comes from religious institutions. Most of these publications, especially Christian, saw it as the role of the family and the church to break the will of children, as they were born evil because of original sin. Wesley is famously quoted as saying, "Spare the rod, spoil the child." Theories then go from one extreme to another. John Locke famously explained that children were born blank slates, tabula rasa. John Rousseau theorized that children were born perfect and good, but it was society that corrupted them. I wonder if you ever spent much time around 2-year-olds? Buy a cookie jar. Watson explains that these theories are helpful as we study human development, but they're not empirical. They're not based on observation. They're based on philosophy. The study of developmental psychology has moved into modern times, requiring that all accepted theories are empirical and observable, and they're able to be proven by multiple observers. It is important to note that all theories still reflect the world and worldview of those who created them. Interestingly enough, the first scientific observation of children more resembled baby biographies that were written by famous people such as Charles Darwin, Alfred Binet, and Jean Piaget. Formal observations were united into theories of developmental psychology. And there's going to be 6 theories reviewed within this presentation, from Freud to Vygotsky. Starting with Freud, the father of modern psychology. The first to explore and study in detail the stages of human psychological development. However, he's a reflection of his time. He was born in a very repressed Victorian Europe, as well as being a Jew in Europe during the rise of the Nazis. This led him to an understandably dark view of humanity. Freud is also famous for uncovering the role of the unconscious and thinking and unconscious thinking and the 3 stages of mind: id, ego, and superego. Erikson was a disciple of Freud and came up with the psychosocial development theory that expanded on the original work of Freud. Erikson observed that humans in Western cultures, where their basic needs are met, go through several stages of life. In each stage there is essential developmental conflict that, if successfully resolved, will result in a virtue. The basic stages were infancy, early childhood, play age, school age, adolescence, early adulthood, and then old age. Adolescent phase is very interesting given my particular field of study, and Erikson coined a phrase which is common in our culture even today, known as identity crisis. When in this stage, individuals spend a lot of time trying to figure out who they are and what they can be, and they are extremely egocentric. It's not just 2-year-olds that are egocentric. Watson jokes that you can hear teens in this stage because they'll sincerely say things like, "I'm sure you're tired of hearing me talk about myself. What do you think of me?" The shift goes from who you care to be, to whom you care to be with, to whom you can take care of, in Erikson's psychosocial development theory. Modern theories like attachment theory integrate components of the other theories and create new theories that stand on their own. The study of attachment theory was extremely interesting, as it is riddled with paradoxes that are surprisingly cyclical. Reminds me of the circle of life in The Lion King. Through the process of attachment to our parents, we are able to gain independence and go off on our own and make friends because we have our parents to fall back on as an emotional base which we can build upon. By having attachment to friends, we are able to build an even closer relationship with a partner because we have the base of our friendships to fall back upon as a base. And through the process of bonding with our partners, we can attach to children as we have our partners to fall back on as a base to help us raise our children. Very circle of life. There is also different types of attachment. In Ainsworth, notably the only female child developmental psychologist in these theorists, said that some attachments were secure, some were insecure, and individuals with secure attachments do better in school and make friends. Ainsworth developed a test of attachment, where she had mothers bring young children into rooms with a stranger. The mother then left the room, and the children's behavior was observed. The two factors measured in this experiment were how anxious the children were when their parents left the room. This was called anxiety of abandonment. They then measured how excited the children were when their parents re-entered the room a few moments later. This was called proximal seeking. These Snoopy characters are placed according to how they might have reacted as young children in the attachment test. For example, Charlie Brown would have probably flipped out when his mom left the room, but been okay when his mom came back. Peppermint Patty, on the other hand, would have been calm when her mom left the room, but excited when her mom came back. The modern social learning theory builds upon the work of the behaviorists, especially Watson, and was extremely influential up through the 1980s. There is a clear behavioral focus on stimulus and response, but what's interesting about this theory is that Bandura also theorizes that we can learn behavior through the observation of others, and it makes total sense. We learn from reinforcement we receive, as well as reinforcement we observe others receiving. He called this social learning theory, although Wikipedia says that the saying monkey see, monkey do does date back to the 1920s. In his famous experiment, it isn't surprising to those who work with children, Bandura's model would be observed engaging in violent behavior towards Bobo the doll. You can see it in the picture. The model would be rewarded or punished or ignored based on which group the children were going to be placed in. Then the child would be placed in a room with Bobo. The children who saw the model who was rewarded for being violent to Bobo, it turns out they were significantly more violent to Bobo. The children who observed the model being punished for being violent to Bobo, not surprisingly, were significantly less violent toward Bobo. The conclusion being that based on the behavior we see others being reinforced for or punished for influences our own behavior, and that has powerful implications to educators. Self-efficacy is an observation that we avoid things we don't like and we're drawn to things we're good at. While there are many factors that go into this, the best way to summarize it is to think of the little train that could. Started by believing you can, it leads to you know I can, and you're drawn to things that you are good at, and if you think you're good at it, you'll be drawn to it. Cognitive development theory was all the rage in the 1970s and 1980s until it was replaced by Vygotskian theory. It dominated developmental study and replaced the behaviorist theories, and it was a complete paradigm shift. It was also kind of interesting that Piaget was friends with Einstein, who famously said that Piaget is a genius. That'd be a pretty nice compliment to get. Like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Piaget thought that children were born basically good, and he carefully observed children and how they did on especially intelligence tests early on. But he was more interested in why they behaved the way they did rather than how they behaved, and he noticed patterns in their errors that led to his developmental theories. Piaget divided child development into 4 now famous stages. And in a great quote, and I'll be covering them in more detail in my next presentation, but in a great quote, Piaget stated that the primary goal of education in the schools should be in creating men and women who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done. I wonder what Piaget would think of standardized testing and the testing movement in our current schools. The next theorist is Vygotsky, whose social development theory has revolutionized education and empowered educators in ways that due to his theories. Through others we become ourselves is the premise of social development theory. Vygotsky is the leading theorist in education circles. His zone of proximal development and scaffolded theories of learning are exciting to educators because it empowers us to positively influence students. There'll be a lot more details about Vygotsky in my next presentation, Vygotsky versus Piaget. But an interesting information about Piaget is that, Vygotsky, is that he was born the same year as Piaget and earned his PhD the same year as Piaget. Yet his theories didn't hit the mainstream of developmental psychology until the 1980s. There are some really good reasons for this. His entire life was a struggle with health and discrimination. He struggled to get an education because he was Jewish and the Soviet Union, and there were quotas on how many Jews could attend educational organizations. He was lucky enough to get in, though, and did earn his PhD. Additionally, much of his work was not published in the old Soviet Union because it contained too many of what were considered Western ideas. Due to his poor health, some of his work was even unfinished at his death, and was finished by others who followed his lead and really carried on Vygotsky's work. He died at the age of 37 of tuberculosis. Remind me never again to complain about my TB test. There are several critical themes in Vygotsky's work of social interaction, and that's that every function appears at least twice, first on a social level, then internalized on an individual level. Vygotsky emphasized the importance of apprentice or more knowledgeable people than we are to learn things from, and spent a lot of time, and my next presentation will also spend a lot of time on zone of proximal development and as well as scaffolded learning to help students pull through their zone of proximal development. For each skill there is a ZPD, or a zone of proximal development. There's the skills the learner can do unaided, there's the skills the learners cannot do at all, and in that middle zone is that zone of proximal development. Those are skills that the learner can do with some guidance. As a practical computer science example, there actually is a debate in computer science circles about whether whether we should provide code to students. A student might be able to complete a program when the starting blocks of code are provided, but with some missing pieces. Those opposed to providing some code try to belittle these challenges, and they call them toy problems. Next time I'm in this debate, I plan to bring up Vygotsky and point out that we learn best through play, and that they should Google 3 letters, ZPD. Thanks for listening to this summary of the theories of child development. In my next presentation, I hope to compare and contrast the 2 critical theories with broad educational implications of Vygotsky and Piaget.